If you are thinking about getting involved in large poetry organizations, running your own events, or maybe just becoming, I don't know, president of the Ohio Poetry Association or something like that, or former president, I should say, this is going to be the talk for you. We have today Chuck Salmons. Chuck, thank you so much for being with us today.
My pleasure, Geoff.
If you had to like just introduce yourself in like 5 seconds, what would you say?
South Columbus kid who never thought he would be a poet but became one and loves it.
And love, that's an important note. An important addition. Cool. So Chuck, again, you are the former president of the OPA. Maybe we could start with there because that's a big transition. What made you decide to step back?
Well, I've been doing it for a while. I served as president for 8 years and then was acting president for a couple years. I was vice president before I was president. I was secretary before that. I mean, I've been involved with the OPA board for I think about 15 years altogether. And so I'm just tired, just need a break.
Yeah.
You know, it's not that I'm going anywhere. I'm not going to leave the organization, or anything like that. But, it was time also for some new blood to come in and to bring in, another vision for where the organization is going to go. And I'm very excited about where the organization is heading with Holly Bryans-Ragusa as the new president. So, but yeah, it was just time, everybody needs a little break every now and then. And this was time for me to take a break.
Let's talk a little bit about vision, which you already mentioned. So can you tell us, if you remember, like when you first became president, what was the vision that you had and how? Let's just actually start there. What was the vision that you had when you first became president?
Well, I actually had a handwritten list of things I wanted to accomplish as president. And so things like this Underground Railroad project that we're doing right now was one of those things on the list. Now that one took a little longer to get accomplished, right? But a number of other things like producing high quality publications, producing more and a bigger variety of programs for our members, because I always have been a strong believer in the idea that our members of OPA or any organization, it's the members that really are the lifeblood of that. And so I'm a very service-oriented kind of guy, and I always wanted to do things better for all the members of OPA. And so, things like contests, we had, writers' retreats, weekend retreats, we had a festival that we brought aboard. That was another thing that we wanted to really do, was to get a festival. So there were a number of things, and those things all fell into place in various different ways. But those are just, some of the things. But I also wanted OPA to have a much nicer website. I wanted it to have a more robust social media presence. I wanted it to feel like a modern professional organization. And we started that with a rebranding when I was vice president and Mark Hersman was president. Another thing we did at that time was we reached out to colleges about, having interns be a part of the organization for a summer. So, all of those things, I know people give me a lot of credit, which I appreciate. However, it really is a team effort. And so, but those are some of the things that I really wanted to accomplish. We brought poetry to the state fair for a few years, which you took part in, and that was another thing. I was always looking for ways to try to get poetry into other places where maybe it wasn't before.
Mm-hmm. How successful do you think you were?
I think not too bad.
Was there like a white whale that we're kind of like missed out on, you feel?
The big one is a brick and mortar space. I really wanted OPA, and still would like OPA to have a physical space where we don't have to rely on libraries or other organizations for our workshops. So that's definitely something that I would still like to continue to work towards, but it's that white whale. It's the one thing that got away from me, during my tenure.
I look at in Columbus where the Streetlight Go, which has a physical building. We look at like Thurber House, which has a physical building. Not to like put you on the spot, why hasn't it happened?
The biggest reason is just funding. I would say, one of my weaknesses as president was the fundraising side. It's not a thing that I'm very adept at. And so
I think poets in general struggle with that.
I think you're right. I think you're right. And maybe writers in general, artists in general, probably have a tough time with that. But, we have made a lot of strides in the last 12 years. We've gotten general operating support from the Columbus Foundation for 12 years in a row, and every year it has gone up. And so I'm hopeful that if that continues, that we can, get to a point where, okay, we're ready to lease a space. What would be even better is if, we were able to get a few donors to actually help us achieve that goal, and to maybe, donate the space to us, either at little to no cost. That's the ideal situation. But, as a statewide organization, the other challenge is that if you have that brick and mortar space, let's say here in Columbus, are you then perceived as not really being a statewide organization? But, so it has its pros and cons, but I think the pros would outweigh the cons, definitely. Especially from a planning standpoint. It would just make a number of things so much easier for us.
Let's imagine, and you talked about your own approach with, walking with a paper, of all the things you wanted to do, but like if someone's thinking about stepping into a leadership type role, whether in their own arts organization or another, what would be your biggest suggestion for them?
Get involved early at a lower level. Get involved as a committee member, or maybe chair an initiative of some sort. Could be membership, could be social media, or some other communications related. Communications stuff is where you're basically going to have your hands in almost everything, right? So, but if you start at one of those lower levels, you really get to know people and to know how the organization functions on a day-to-day basis, so that when you are ready to maybe step into a higher level leadership position, you're armed with a lot of good information and a lot of connections that you've made by helping out with other things early on. That's what I did. I mean, I think the first thing I got involved with OPA was the newsletter. And that helped me to build relationships with the then president, the late Doug Rutledge, and all the other board members, and to get a sense of, okay, this is how the organization is running now, but where could it be improved? Where could we do things better? And then from there, I just started, getting more and more involved with various things until I was ready to take on a leadership position.
I think it's interesting when you mentioned communications, and it's people skills, communication, especially with social media. It's very easy for that to just absorb all of your time. Yeah.
Well, and OPA is an all volunteer organization, and so one of the things that I was very cognizant of, especially as vice president and president, was to never ask people to do something that either they weren't comfortable doing, simply didn't want to do, or weren't armed with the skills to do, right? They're all volunteers too.
Right.
So I'm not going to be the kind of leader that says, no, you need to do this. No, that's not my style. I wouldn't want somebody to tell me to do something that I wasn't really prepared to do. So, but having started out with OPA at those lower level positions and just building a network of acquaintances and relationships with other officers and people outside of OPA, you're able to develop the relationships you need when those bigger initiatives come along. And you can say, oh yeah, I think so-and-so would be a great fit for this project. I think so-and-so would love to do this project because this is is right up their alley. So I think there's so much upside to kind of starting at a smaller place within the organization and then just kind of working your way up. Now that's not to say that you couldn't come aboard like, let's say you've just been a member for a number of years. So you've seen, okay, this is how they do the newsletter. This is how they do the website, right? And this applies to any organization. Maybe you come in with a lot of ideas as well as information and connections, and you're ready to jump into that. But it is a time commitment, and so you have to be ready for that as well. So if you have a family, it can be tough, as you know. If you have, maybe you're a caregiver, maybe you are, a single income, and you kind of have to make sure that your job is your number one focus. So all those things, should weigh into somebody's decision as well.
How prepared do you think the OPA is for 2024, 2025 and moving forward?
I think very prepared. There are still, a number of folks on the planning team and the board who have been there for a number of years, but you've got some fresh, leadership with Holly, but then also John Burroughs is the new second vice president, and, Johnny McIntyre, who has stepped into the treasurer's position. She was membership chair for a few years before that. Mm-hmm. So, there are people in place. And then again, I'm not going anywhere. So I'm there to help in any way I can, whether it's to counsel people or actually take on, a task that needs to be done. So I think it's going to be exciting. And the ambassadors that are already selected, I think Holly made an announcement about that fairly recently on social media. So now this is one of her big initiatives, right, is this ambassadors thing. I love it. And she's got great people lined up to serve initially in those roles. I think that can only help OPA serve poets as a whole across the community, not just our members, but to really reach out to some of those reading series, where maybe we aren't making connections, or academia even, So yeah, I think that's just one example of what she's going to bring to the table, but I think it'll be exciting.
One of the things I'm thinking about too when I ask that is, so I see the new initiatives, you mentioned the ambassador program, which was already posted on social media. How well do you think the OPA is handling social media in general?
It could be better, Again, it kind of goes back to that voluntary nature of the organization. And so I can tell you, Karen Scott is doing a good job, but, she's running, several Facebook pages, not just for OPA, but for other organizations. I try to help her out as I can. My day job is very demanding, and, it kind of, makes me tired quite often. I get home, I don't want to get on social media. So it could be better, and there are probably a number of things that we could be doing that we're not. But again, you need the people, and so I'm hoping that maybe that's something that will get better under Holly's leadership. I have to just say, the other thing I'm excited about is Holly is the first woman president of OPA in 25 years. That's another thing I'm very excited about. It's long overdue, quite honestly, but the nature of the organization is such that if no one steps up to fill those roles, well, so it's not like we weren't trying to get a different perspective. It's just no one wanted to step into the presidency. So
then how has that position become more desirable? I'm guessing a big hurdle is the fact it's volunteer-based and it's a lot of work. Is there any way you think that sort of position could become something that people more actively pursue?
Well, obviously, if there was some sort of stipend with it, right, that would certainly help. Not that I'm complaining, but I think that would appeal to people if there was some sort of stipend.
So no one in OPA gets a stipend?
No.
Could you see that model changing in the future or no?
It could, and I think about another organization that I'm involved with, and that organization is primarily volunteer run. However, they have what they call a business manager, who is just a part-time employee, And what they do is they handle sending out the newsletter every quarter and handle registrations for events and, those types of things. But it's only so many hours a week. And it's a very small stipend. But it all comes down to funding. And, can OPA get the kind of funding that's needed to make those stipends possible? For me, it was a passion project.
Yeah.
Service is in my blood. I think back to 5th grade as a crossing guard, 4th and 5th grade in elementary school.
I can see it. I see you in a vest. I see it.
I had the vest and the AAA, because at that time AAA was the sponsor of the crossing guard. So we wore these little badges, and we had our flags. And of course I was captain of the crossing guard my 5th grade year. So, going all the way back there, and probably even earlier,
right.
with the church that I went to growing up, I've always been involved with some sort of service to the community. And so here all of a sudden, I get out of grad school and I come back to Columbus, and it's like, oh, here's an organization where I can combine my, desire to be of service with poetry, an art form that I love, right? I mean, that's why I went to grad school, was to, study poetry more in depth. So for me, it was like, oh, well, this is just something really cool that I can do in my spare time. But, maybe not everybody can just use that as enough justification, right? So, but I think you have to have a little bit of that. I think you have to have that passion to serve in some capacity.
I feel like one of the obstacles too with funding is that, OPA is so large, so it's like you get funding, but it's like you're covering the entire state. So I imagine it can't stretch very far. Like, have you ever been talks to like organize more local sorts of organizations? Like I said, like a Ohio Poetry Association, like a Columbus Poetry Association, or things like that. Would that, do you think, make things more manageable, or make things more complicated?
And this would be affiliated with OPA, or
potentially, I don't know, or then the OPA, like kind of just like spokes in the wheel kind of a thing, So it's like you have your different branches in Central Head. I don't know if that would.
Well, I can tell you that some of the other state societies have a chapter system. And a number of years ago, when Mark Hersman was president, I think I was vice president at the time, we looked into the chapter idea. And at that time, it didn't make sense for us. We were still growing. We were still trying to increase our membership numbers and, really try to get the organization to flourish a little more. But that doesn't mean that maybe a chapter system isn't possible down the road. And that possibly could be a way to, increase some sort of funding stream. But again, it would depend on, okay, what do those chapters look like? Direction? Are they themselves membership based? Are they, when they have events, does that money come into OPA, or does it stay with the chapters? So there's a lot of that kind of stuff that would have to be figured out. But Ohio is such a robust place for community, for poetry, excuse me, and has such a diverse sort of number of resources for people to get involved. There are open mics, there are small writing groups, there are large writing groups like Lit Youngstown, Lit Cleveland. There are local poets laureate, there are libraries that do poetry related activities. Then you have things like the Wick Poetry Center up in Kent. I mean, there's so much to choose from. And I think one of the things that would be really cool in the future is if there was a way to connect those organizations more so than they are now. Because, OPA has a pretty good relationship with some of those organizations, but maybe there's a way to increase the interaction between them and to be of mutual benefit in some way. One of the things OPA doesn't do regularly is like a big conference, something like Lit Youngstown or Lit Cleveland does, right? So that could be a potential way to expand both the funding stream and the involvement, with local communities in some way. So again, this is where, Holly and the new board are going to probably bring some ideas to the table, and I'll be more than happy to chip in and help out.
So you mentioned some of the sorts of events that other places are doing, like you mentioned, like Lit, like the conferences and things like that. You handled working with events as well. If someone has an idea for an event, can you just walk us through maybe 3 or 4 steps that you think would be really important for them to take?
Well, you're going to need a team, right, for any event to really be successful. Now, how big that team is depends on the size of the event, but the main thing, first of all, is to have a vision, like write it out. What is it that you see happening at this event? Who do you think the key players will be? What's thematically, like what's the main objective going to be for the event? Have it all written down so that when you pull together potential team members to help you pull it off, you can show them, okay, this is my vision, but I want to hear your ideas. How can this be better? How can this be executed if it's something that's going to be particularly challenging? I'm a real firm believer in having a strong team for just about anything that I undertake. And but most importantly, it's spelling it out ahead of time, because you're going to get better buy-in from people if you have put a lot of thought into your idea. People may get really excited to then step in and help you execute the event, right? Find partners, especially if it's going to be a big event. One of the things that OPA has done in recent years that I'm very proud of is we've started to work with more partners, and pick partners that have similar missions, or maybe have similar visions of how to reach the community, how to reach artists, the public, whatever that target audience is. Because then if you can spell out, okay, this will be your role as a partner while we take care of all of these things, well, that partner then has a better understanding of just what your vision is for the program, but they may also have ideas that, again, could make that event even better than it already seems to be. And of course, if you have the chops to find funding sources, if funding sources are needed, now it depends on the nature of the event, right? But if a funding stream of some sort is needed, make sure that you've researched the possibilities. Are there grants out there that are available to fund your project? Are there potential donors who maybe would be willing to underwrite the event? Are there maybe ticket sales? Again, it really is going to depend on the nature of the event. But have a good idea about what it's going to cost and how you would pay for it. Because, again, that just shows people that you really put a lot of thought into the project. And then what are the expected outcomes? Knowing, what your main objectives are, how you're going to achieve them. Is there going to be some sort of publication that comes out of the event, like an anthology or some sort of special chapbook or something like that? Maybe it's artwork that's going to come out of it, printed artwork, or whatever those are. Make sure you know exactly what's going to come out of this, not only for you and the organization, but for everybody who's involved. So those are probably the goals, are the goals measurable, I guess, is another thing to maybe think about. And then consider doing like a survey of people who take part afterwards and get their feedback, so that if you think you'd like to do that again, you have their feedback about what worked, what didn't work, So those are probably the first things that come to my mind.
Mm-hmm. One thing that I think has come up a lot is the idea of funding and things like that. Do you think that having so much of poetry focus on nonprofit philanthropy, donations, and things like that. Do you think that that makes it more difficult for poetry to be sustainable on like a larger level?
Well, I think, as you know, being a poet is typically not going to be a wealth building activity, right? So, my approach is with OPA at least has been to like, how can we engage the community and show them the value of poetry in as many ways as possible, so that then maybe they will then go leave this event and then go out and seek more poetry in other places, whether it's in a bookstore, at an open mic, special readings, whatever, to then support those poets that maybe they got to hear in a better way. I don't necessarily, on a personal level, I don't write poetry to make money, right? I write it because it's my passion, and because it's one of my forms of expression, which I think is really important for people, is have some form of expression, whatever it is. It could be cooking, sewing, whatever. If you want to make poetry a money-making endeavor, that's like a job, right? I mean, you almost have to have money to spend to do the work to then make money off your poetry in some way. Now, some people are probably willing to do that. Maybe you have a partner or a spouse that is able to, support you in a lot of ways while you're able to get your poetry business off the ground. But for me, that was never the objective. But I know that there are poets out there who are using Patreon. And so they're producing not only poetry, but they're producing, maybe writing exercises or other forms of poetic media. Could be framed prints or whatever. Like, they're doing those things. Etsy might be another way, that poets are doing that. I think the advent of social media and the internet has really changed the landscape for how writers, especially, Amazon, that's another one, right? When you're, self-publishing and selling your book on Amazon, like all those things have really changed the game. So that traditional publishing is, that's still an option for you, but you have all these other means at your disposal. YouTube, right? Putting yourself on YouTube as a way to market yourself, not only to sell books, but maybe you're bringing in ad revenue through YouTube, right? So these are all things that I know other poets are doing. I'm by no means an expert at it, but I think some equivalents would be like, the Justin Biebers of the world, and there are maybe a few poets out there who have made names for themselves in this manner. But I do think still poetry is a tough sell for the public, for the general public. Typically at poetry events, you see a lot of other poets,
right?
Or people who at least like poetry, like to read it or like to hear it performed. It's tough to get just average folks off the street to go out and buy poetry books.
100%. Yeah. Any final things that you think would be helpful for people to know as they get involved in whether their own organizations, larger organizations, and things like that?
I think, the thing for me that has just been so rewarding about what I've done with my poetry or my time working with OPA is it's enabled me to live a poetic life. And quite honestly, if that's what you want, you can do that in so many ways that, maybe it's not going to make you a lot of money or anything, but it will bring you a great deal of happiness. And that, for me, has been probably the most rewarding aspect of the last almost 20 years, is that I've been able to live a poetic life. I have a monthly poetry group that I go to for workshopping. I've been involved with OPA. I've been involved with readings and other events, and have made so many friends through this who bring me so much joy, while still being able to write my own poems and, publish a few books. Like, that's a poetic life, man. That's for me, that's what I wanted. And I'm able to do it still having a day job. So it's possible. It really is possible. And I'm happy to talk to anybody about that who, wants to maybe take that step and get involved in some way. Because I have nothing but positive things to say about it. Even when it doesn't all go right or go according to plan,
right.
You're still doing something poetic,
Mm-hmm.
and just making connections that probably I never would have had. So that would be the last thing I would add.
Cool. Chuck, thank you so much for talking with us. We appreciate you.
My pleasure, Geoff. Thank you.